of online education. And the council includes 2 representatives from each of the chancellor-led units. Some of them are here today. And so you can raise your virtual hand and take credit for the work that you're doing. Also, a representative from the University Senate, and then ex officio members, including my colleague Will Pagan, who we've highlighted here, who is the Associate Vice President for Online Programs at Rutgers, and who is my partner in much of this work. So in thinking about this expert forum series, we thought, what better place to start than really diving into understanding the prospective online student. And so we're very excited to have experts from EAB joining us today. Jon Rice, who is the Associate Director of Research Advisory Services, and Anthony Mitchell, who is the Senior Director of Research Partner Services. And so I'm going to soon turn this to Jon and Anthony, but before I do that, I just wanted to give you an overview of what you could expect ahead. So first of all, we are recording this session. We'll record the formal portion from 4 to 5 p.m. so that we can share with those who were unable to be here today. What you can expect in terms of our format is Jon and Anthony are going to have a formal presentation for about 20 to 25 minutes, touching on various themes around what students are looking for with online programs and what they expect to find. And then Will actually lead a facilitated sort of part of question and answer, and I'll please enter your questions into the Q&A box. I'll monitor that. We'll work that into that discussion, as well as, you know, a sort of more of that time. At 5 o'clock, we'll take a sort of short wrap up. And then for those of you who are able to stay, and we'll move to a less formal format, we'll open the microphone, open the stage, and let you ask your questions directly of Anthony and Jon. So that's what to expect. And I think with that, what I will do is encourage you to enter questions as we go. As I said, I will continue to monitor that so that we can be sure we're answering the questions that you're most curious to discuss. And so again, thank you for being here. We're very excited to have you here and super excited for the discussion ahead.
All right, thank you so much, Kathy. I'm going to go ahead and go through the ritual of sharing my screen, as we all know too well in the Zoom world. Kathy, if I can get a heads up or a thumbs up that it's sharing, it's always appreciated. Thank you so much. We're really excited to be with this group this afternoon to talk about a key topic, understanding the mindset of adult learners, and then some of the key market trends that we are seeing in the graduate and particular online space as well. To introduce myself, my name is Jon Rice. As Kathy mentioned, I serve as Associate Director on our Research Advisory Services team at EAB. We'll momentarily introduce what EAB is in a moment, but to give a sense on my role, my job is essentially to be a subject matter expert in all things enrollment, marketing, and adult education at the firm, and to curate our research perspective and know that behind Anthony and myself, we have a team of over 100 researchers based in Washington, D.C. and around the country doing quantitative and qualitative work to understand the biggest challenges that are keeping folks up at night. So I'll let Anthony introduce himself as well and his role at the firm.
Thanks, Jon. Good to be here with everyone. My name is Anthony Mitchell, and I'm a Senior Director on our Research Partner Success team. And what we really do is work with our partners, kind of understanding what their key priorities are, and consider me the connection between you, the institution, and our firm, EAB. So it's really my job in understanding how we can help and support you to bring in key EAB resources like Jon, right, to help drive value for our partnership. And as we get a little later in the presentation, I'll go through how we partner with the institution and ways that you can take advantage of some of the benefits involved.
Thank you so much, Anthony. And I have to say, I'm also particularly passionate about this topic. I'm a former practitioner. Prior to joining the firm, I spent about a decade at the University of San Francisco here in California, where I'm based. We will not talk about the Super Bowl today, I promise. That's too much for me. And so this is a topic that's near and dear to our hearts. Just a quick reminder on who EAB is, if this is the first time you've engaged with us directly. EAB is a best practice research and technology firm for education. We spent the better part of 40 years working with schools and students to be a trusted partner. If you have heard of EAB, you may know we do a lot, and our work is represented by the 5 pillars you see on the screen in front of you. I just want to highlight where Anthony and I come from. We hail from the far left, which is this institutional strategy imperative. So our work is really focused on what is keeping folks up at night. Again, what are the greatest challenges and what are the best practices that can drive institutions forward? And that's absolutely critical when we talk about the graduate market, the online space as well. Part of our benefit is scale. We partner with over 2,500 different institutions. So that gives us a unique insight into the challenges and opportunities that institutions face. For the course of our time together, I want to split at least our formal presentation, my portion, into 2 sections. First, I want to share with you some of the key market trends that we're seeing in this space. One of the common conversations that comes up is just how much growth opportunity is there. And then secondarily, but also crucially, I want to take a moment for us to think about what is the mindset of an adult learner in 2024. When these students are looking at programs, considering opportunities, what is top of mind for them in selecting those programs? And what do institutions need to be doing to stay on their radar as well? So we'll start with the market itself. And the first thing I would note is that the adult and graduate education market is big. It's really big. And I mention this because it's interesting when I work with institutions that frequently we focus predominantly on the traditional undergraduate space. That's the conversation that takes up a lot of the air in the room. But as you'll note on the left-hand side of the slide, when we think about the revenue within higher education, adult and graduate education as of 2021 made up about $84 billion. And while that hasn't eclipsed traditional undergraduate, I think for a lot of colleagues I work with, this is much closer to parity than folks might expect. On the other side of things, it's interesting to see where that market is split. Often we think about master's degrees, and that is a significant portion of the revenue in the market, but adult degree completion, adult bachelor's degrees, those make up a significant portion of the adult education space as well. So perhaps busting some myths or some assumptions that we might make when we think about the adult and the graduate and the online space. I want to focus on 3 markets today, or 3 areas within the market: the master's market, the degree completion market, again, being so large. And then I want to touch a little bit on that 4% slice of certificates, knowing that's the most nascent and perhaps exciting and perhaps nerve-wracking, depending on who you are, portion of the market. But we'll start with the master's degree. What you're seeing, or we'll start with, is the expectations of the size of the market. And what I'll share in a moment are master's degree conferrals and projections from 2008. We projected out to 2031, and this is data from NCES. What we find is that from 2008 to 2021, we saw about 2.2% average annual growth in the space, so a nice upward trend. NCES at that time projected that we would see continued growth, and it would actually increase slightly to 2.8% through 2024. It's not actually what happened. In reality, we bottomed off. We did not see that level of growth, and then it picked up again a little later into 2016, 2017. So NCES redid their projections. They said, okay, that was not where we want to be. We'll be very conservative, 0.2% projected annual growth between 2020 and 2030. Well, as you'll note on the gray bars in the slide, this represents recessionary periods, and we hit that COVID-19 economic moment. And of course, we see a bump in the conferrals coming out of that period. I should note this is conferral, so it's a lagging indicator. We see those conferrals typically a couple of years after students enroll. And so the new projection was more modest at 1.1%. If we just take this slide in aggregate, I think the feeling that many have about the master's market is one of uncertainty, that this is all over the place. And while that's what the short term shows, if we look into the long-term picture, a much more steady picture emerges when we're thinking about the master's market. Again, looking at conferrals, now we've pulled back to 1990 through 2031. The gray bars represent those recessionary periods. And we see a more consistent experience, which is that of durable but slow growth. We've actually seen growth of around 3.2% across this entire period. So yes, there are market shocks. There are moments that pull us back, but as a whole, we see an upward trend here. The other thing I'd highlight is within the recessionary periods. What we tend to see through recessions is a slight increase coming out of that recession, followed by a plateauing. You'll note how there's a little flat line after each recession, followed by continual growth. Now, I will say, we don't want to project the opportunity in the master's space based on recessions alone. That would be a very craven way of thinking about enrollment. One area we can think about, however, is the unemployment rate of students with undergraduate degrees. So typically, if the unemployment rate goes up for students who have undergraduate degrees, there seems to be a correlated increase in graduate enrollment, and vice versa. When the unemployment rate of students with undergraduate degrees goes down, so goes down the master's market as well. But the story here, slow, durable growth. The degree completion market is another area that there's a lot of excitement in. When we think about these adult degree completers, that is, these students who have some college but haven't completed it, we find that it's a very large market, but it's not entirely being addressed. This is a snapshot in 2021, 2022. What we saw at that time was that of the 20.3 million 25 to 65-year-olds who fit into that some college, no credential space, just 4% of them actually enrolled in college. So there's a lot of opportunity here. That's a huge market. The negative or challenge for four-year universities is most of those students are re-enrolling at open access institutions, and particularly community colleges, lower cost spaces. So there's a huge addressable market here, but most of higher education has not necessarily aligned itself to support degree completion students. Where we see the greatest opportunity is stop-out students. It's the students that already were at Rutgers or were at your institution and then decided to leave. We find that historically, a significant portion of the students who stop out from an institution will return to the same institution that they stopped out from. Again, community colleges address most of this, but one significant opportunity in degree completion is a moment to support our own students who've been at the institution and left. And I would say also, this is a wonderful moment where mission meets margin. As a public institution, we have a mission to serve our students, and that's an important aspect here. But also from a margin perspective, this is an important revenue opportunity that most institutions are not tapping into in the way that we might hope to see in the future. So a lot of opportunity in the adult degree completion space, a lot we need to do in terms of our program design and support services for these students, particularly when we think about stop-outs, because they may have left the institution with an odd taste in their mouth, thinking about something negative that might have happened during this time. The third market I want to touch on is the most nascent, and that is the certificate space. And most of this is online. When we look at overall certificates, we find that graduate certificates, that is, these post-baccalaureate or post-master certificates, make up a relatively small part of the market, just 8% of the market as of 2021. And most of those are not postmasters. These are for students who've earned a bachelor's degree but haven't gone beyond that. If you all step back from your screens for a moment and squint, the chart on the right-hand side is perhaps one of the happiest looking charts if you don't look at the numbers. This is showing the growth in graduate certificate conferrals from 2003 to 2021. And what we see is a nice upward trend. Now, when you refocus your vision, you see the problem becomes it's a pretty small market. Even though we've seen really significant growth in this space, as at the end of 2021, the entire conferral in that market was just 89,000. And that's across over 1,200 different institutions, and almost 12,500 programs. So while there's a lot of hype and excitement about the certificate space and the micro-credential space, the growth is not, the growth is great. The market size is not as strong as we'd like to see. This is particularly important when we're looking at how new institutions are launching these certificate programs. And what you see on the chart here is the percentage change since 2012 through 2021. And the orange line represents new program launches, and the dark blue line represents certificate conferrals. And without me explaining too much, you already see what's happening here. We have seen extreme excitement from institutions in launching certificates. It is the hot thing that folks are talking about. And what we've seen is a 9% growth rate in the launch of these new programs. We reached just about 16,000 programs by 2021. But the growth rate for conferrals has been just 6%. So what we see there is far more excitement on the part of higher education than on the part of our students in this space. So there's opportunity here, but there's a lot to think about how we launch these programs and move forward. The other struggle is that many of these programs aren't actually enrolling students. Of all of the 4-credit graduate certificate programs as of 2021, 44% of them didn't have any completions. No one finished the program. Even if you take those programs out, or when you take those programs out, for the 4-credit graduate certificate programs, the average number of conferrals in 2021 was just 5 students. So I mention this because there's a lot of excitement in this space. Folks think, well, this is the way we're going to grow. We are ready for that in higher education. Our students may not be. So let's take a moment to think about the mindset of our adult learners of today. Back to these markets, what are students looking for? And particularly with that online student, the first thing we see is that the pathway to higher education or continued higher education as an adult learner is not linear. At the undergraduate level, we often talk about the enrollment funnel. A student moves from the awareness of the institution to considering different institutions to deciding to attend. What we find with adult learners is that on average, they're spending about 18 months investigating and thinking about whether or not they want to return to school. Most of them have no idea where they want to go. Many of them are focused on outcomes, and because of that long, drawn-out process, they're applying to fewer schools than ever before. What's driving those students is a strong sense of pragmatism. As I mentioned, we see that a significant portion of these adult students are applying to 2 or fewer schools, and they are easily dissuaded if something gets in the way. So when they think about the admission process, if there is an admission requirement that feels above and beyond for that student, they are not going to move forward in the process. We surveyed students age 26 or older about their admission beliefs, processes, and we found that, as you see on the list in front of you, an application fee, a specific GPA prerequisite, degree prerequisites, those can get in the way of a student actually enrolling in an online program or a graduate or adult program. And so our view as EAB is that admission for adult students has to be driven by the principles on the right. In particular, this first one, do we have enough information to make a good decision in most cases? So I don't know about y'all, when I was on the admission side, I would frequently see programs that had lots and lots of requirements, extra letters of recommendation, extra essays. And one of the hard questions we ask is, do you actually need those to make a good decision? And frequently we would find out that letters of recommendation, extra essays, they were not even being read. They were added into the process because this belief that, oh, we need to have quote unquote standards, but we're not actually using this to make a good decision. So I don't want to say we want to get rid of standards, but we want to have this approach to say, what do we actually need to make a good decision for the institution that supports both our goals and the student in the admission process? This should also be aligned with the 3 things that we see prioritized by adult learners across master's degrees, certificate programs. There are 3 things that come up again and again as top priorities. First, speed to completion. How quickly can I get this thing done? And you'll note what feeds into that is not just how the classes are offered or when they're offered, but how are you taking my prior credit? How are you accepting in work I did before? Secondarily is flexibility, not just in terms of when you offer the classes or the modality, but is it customized to what I want to learn and what I feel like is going to be helpful for my career goals? And then always affordability and return on investment. More than our undergraduate students, our students are thinking about the personal payoff and how much this costs, and is the money I spend going to be worth it? One challenge I want to put forward to you is to think about how we get beyond the idea of a working professional. And I won't go through all of this slide, but just to say, we say that term a lot in online adult education. And the reality is very few are just a working professional, so to speak. They have various reasons that they want to go back to school, and that's critical to think about. So for example, a student who's upskilling in place, a student who needs new skills to keep up with job expectations, their reason or value of getting a credential might be quite different than someone on the far right who's just pursuing a passion. And our programs need to be mindful of that approach as well. An area that we see within this is thinking about modality, and in the online space in particular. We are seeing a number of program designs that are starting to emerge that are different from what we're used to. So I think most of us are familiar with an accelerated program, a micro-credential, a mini MBA, a boot camp. Those are popular. But as you move to the right-hand side of the slide, some newer versions of programs, modular programs, experiential learning-based programs, or what is now the biggest frontier, I would say, programs based on demonstrated mastery. And we've seen Southern New Hampshire and Western Governors do this very well, where a student can progress at the exact speed that they want to progress in. The last thing I'll touch on is how students are discovering programs and who these students are. We have seen a phenomenon over the years called stealth shopping. And some of you may have heard this term. It's the idea of a student who doesn't declare themselves in the process. They don't email us. They don't fill out an inquiry form. They don't tell the university who they are until they apply. When we think about this phenomenon, in 2012, about 20% of students applying to professional continuing or online education qualified as stealth shoppers. As of 2022, that number's ballooned to 80%. So 80% of the students that are looking at adult education are never going to fill out an inquiry. They're not going to email us. They're not going to let us know who they are until they apply. And so this drastically shifts the way that we need to think about recruiting students into programs. It means that we have to have information on our website more accessible than ever before. Gatekeeping is not an option. We need to make sure that there's easy awareness of our processes, that we're not hiding how we work through it. And all of this is only going to get worse because we see changing behaviors around privacy. The conversation around digital privacy has gone from one that nerds like me in San Francisco used to have to one that's across our entire conversation. The other shift we see that's driving this stealth shopping is the generational takeover in adult education. This is pretty stunning and something that a lot of the partners that Anthony and I work with are not necessarily ready for because we're so focused on our day-to-day. We are about to see a massive generational shift in adult learners. 2022 and still right now, the majority of adult learners are like me. They are millennials. We've got some in Gen Xers and baby boomers. Gen Zers make up just 17%. But by 2031, which is just 2 undergraduate classes fully graduating away, that makes it feel much closer, I think. 60% of the market is going to be made up of Gen Z. Millennials drop to 30%. And along with Gen Z's rise come all of their marketing and preferences and expectations. And so the last thing I'll share and the last piece of advice on this point is that we need to think a lot about how we're sharing our information online so that these stealth shoppers, these Gen Z students, and adult learners can get the information that they need without talking to one of us, that they can quickly find out what's going on. The University of Aberdeen is a great example of this. They've developed an adult learner website where they've put all of those key details at the top of each page. And they've made sure that it's really easy to get this information, that they're seeing students like them going through this process. So one area we think about more and more is how are we continuously innovating, updating our web presence, our digital marketing presence to make sure that students have easy access to this information through the channels that they are using, not the channels that are most comfortable for us. So I know I gave a lot. I want to summarize, then turn over to my colleague Anthony to share a little bit more about EAB's resources. But to summarize what we shared here, the master's market first shows durable, stable, and slower growth even with these short-term shocks. The growth in the market is linked to the job market outlook, typically, of the undergraduate degree holder. The adult degree completion market has a lot of opportunity, but there's a lot of challenges to enroll those students. And the greatest opportunity remains our own students who've stopped out from the institution. Certificates and micro-credentials see a lot of growth, but it's a small market. And so the opportunity is going to be in thinking about how we might test the waters without going fully in. And then finally, adult learners are prioritizing that speed to completion, that flexibility, and that affordability. And that becomes crucial as Gen Z rises to take part of more of the market. I'm going to turn over to Anthony to share a little bit about some of the services that EAB offers, some of the services you have available to you through your partnership, and then we'll move to Will with some questions. So Anthony.
Thanks, John. Thanks for sharing your slides. Yeah, just wanted to share a little bit and focus in on some of what is available to you. There is a lot. So I'll key in on a few things that most of our partners take advantage of. And then you will have this presentation. You'll be able to refer to the content that John shared, as well as some of the links that I'll share in the following slides. So when you think about professional and adult education advisory services with EAB, if you look at the left hand of the slide, those are our areas of expertise, right? So we can help our partners, in one of four ways, in a standard way. But what I also recommend to our partners is if you have a need that doesn't fit neatly into a box, call us, right? We like to be challenged. We like the opportunity. It allows us to stay on top of what are those pressing things that our partners are trying to solve, and how do we solve them in collaboration with them. Some of the ways that we work with our partners and things that you have access to, you'll see on the right. Again, we do executive roundtables annually. We have leadership summits. We bring out experts like John on a variety of topics. We do organizational benchmarking surveys. We have a ton of content in our library. And instead of you having to navigate all that is on the EAB website, you do have a dedicated strategic leader in myself that can help you, again, align those things that you're looking for and to help solve problems. John, if you'll go to the next slide. Wanted to highlight, as we look at our year ahead and the things that we're focused on for our research agenda, a couple of these things stand out, and I'm sure are no surprise to anyone on this line. How do we anticipate the wave of competition that's out there, right? And it's not just other institutions, but it's those that are deciding not to enroll at a university or college, those that are not, those that decide to go to work or do something different. How do you stay ahead of what the market needs? And John talked about some of that. As you think about your own brand and how you want to grow over the years. AI is a topic that no matter the research terrain, no matter the partner, no matter the role at the institution, it has come up in literally every conversation that my colleagues and I have had with our partners. And it's an area that everybody is still trying to get their arms around, but we, in collaboration with you, want to stay on top of how can we use this to our advantage? What are the best practices? Because it's not going away, right? And then something that John talked about a little bit, but we do dig a bit more into, and will be, is a financially viable micro-credential portfolio, right? It's great to have all these programs and these opportunities, but if no one's enrolled in them, or they're not financially viable, that's a different situation to address. John, if you go to the next slide. In addition to the research presentations like we have today, and digging into some of the other benefits that I highlighted on the first slide, one of the things that our partners definitely take advantage of is our market insight service. And it's a way for us to help our partners look at program growth at every stage. Whether you're considering new program opportunities, whether you want to validate a new program, you're considering something new to roll out to the market, whether you want to review your portfolio, as many institutions are doing at this time of the year, or you want to look at a program that's not particularly performing well, and you need some analysis and some guidance on why that may be. We have reports that dig into each of those areas in partnership with Lightcast. And again, that's another service that we provide as part of this partnership. That's no additional cost to you. And John, if you'll go to the next slide. If you haven't already, please go to the EAB website and create your profile. You just need your institution's email address. It usually takes less than a day for you to have access to everything on EAB.com. And what you'll notice once you do have your profile set up is it'll populate all of the research products that your institution has access to. So outside of PAE, Professional and Adult Education, we have 10 other research terrains that you do actually have access to that you can dig into at your leisure. What I also recommend, is making sure that you curate your profile. We don't have our marketing colleagues on the line, so I can say this comfortably. We will send you emails on everything under the sun if you allow us to. So tell us what you want to see, the topics, the type of content, and we'll make sure that we only send you that information. It's better for us to send things that you're actually going to read and that are of interest to you versus us, bombarding you with everything that we do, because it is a lot. And the last slide, John. The resource hub. For each of our research terrains, we've set up what we call a resource hub, and consider it a one-stop shop for any research terrain that you're looking at. So professional adult education, once you log into this hub, you'll see all of the latest research that we're working on. You'll see upcoming events. You'll see past events that even if you didn't attend, you can log into those and get the content that was shared. This is really where you'll find anything that's related to the partnership. I say start there, spend no more than a minute or two kind of looking through the hub, looking through our website. If you have issues finding something, feel free to reach out, and I'm more than happy to help. And that was what I have for my slides. So I think, Will, we'll turn it over to you at this point, or John, did you have something else?
No, Will, we'll turn it to you.
All right. Wonderful. Listen, gentlemen, thank you again. Very informative, lots to dive through and parse through and really kind of internalize a bit, and hope. I think a lot of people on the call have looked at some of these things before, and I think some that haven't, or we're always looking for ways to improve. Mm-hmm. A few things that came to mind as I was listening and going through the presentation. One is talking about the website and the information that's presented. Now, currently, we are working towards building out a website that's inclusive of all the online programs at Rutgers. And our approach is really to make sure that we have consistent, high-level information about all the programs on the website that's maintained centrally. And then there will be more specific information that will be linked out to the web pages that are maintained by the programs themselves. What would you say is like the best strategy for having this work well? What would you say, what should go where? There's, again, we're thinking of high-level information on a centrally maintained site, but do you have any suggestions on how that's informed by your research on how this could work well, where there's a centrally maintained site, but still the programs having their individual program pages?
Well, it's a great question. I want to take a step back and first just acknowledge something that is unspoken in higher education, but is crucial to think about. In the outside of higher education, just in the world, the average company website gets entirely rebuilt every 2 years. So if it feels like we are always talking about the website, it's because we have to. That is the world that we are in. So the first thing I'd say, and that is we are going to be having a constant fight about the website. And those of us that dream about that going away, that needs to become part of the experience because it's so critical. I would say that there's two guiding principles that I see in this work. First is the conversation needs to be how many clicks does it take for that adult learner to get to that key information. So first of all, I think it's fine to have separately, maintain levels of detail. What I would say is critical is if there's information that's separated out between the program specific page and the overarching online division or graduate division pages, those key questions of speed to completion or time to completion, the return on the affordability, return on investment, the flexibility, those need to be sourced at the top so a student doesn't have to click into the details on the program page to get there. And that's one of the mistakes we often see, because that student who's asking over and over again, how long is it going to take? They're not going to click through and read the details of that process of the program until they know up front. And so that's the critical piece. The other area I'd say is there needs to be constant contact and information between the central coordinating offices and the programs to make sure that's kept up to date. I am constantly astonished when I'm going through websites and auditing them, how often there is conflicting information between program-specific pages and central pages. And in the world we're in right now, and the level of service and expectation that students have outside of higher education, which is certainly informing how they view higher education, that level of inconsistency doesn't work. So to summarize again, need to have that consistency. We need to make sure we're surfacing the key questions up at the top level. We can have additional information in the depth on those program-specific pages. And of course, it needs to be kept up to date. Anthony, do you have anything else you want to add on that side?
Nothing else to add specifically, but I will say that we can share best practices. When I mentioned earlier the Market Insight service, a web audit is included as one of the services that we offer. So either if the website is built and you want us to kind of give some recommendations on changes, or if you're in the process of making changes already, we do have some best practices that we can share that can help inform the work.
So, just based on your responses there, I do think communication is key, right? To ensure that consistency between the central office as well as with the programs of making sure that that information is kept consistent across the board there. And the high level information, I could imagine the details of the programs, the individual courses or the cadence, those are the things that would be more attuned to the individual program pages, whereas, like you said, the high level, how much is it going to cost, the time to completion, those things are more in the central pages. Yeah. Wonderful. A couple other things for you. Most of our current online program portfolio are master's programs. And these are important programs. And Rutgers being a R1 research level research institution, we're well positioned to offer high quality graduate programs. Now, given your findings about the competition in this market, are there any changes or an approach that we might prioritize to keep these programs relevant, given that there is kind of a slower but yet steady growth rate predicted for graduate programs?
Yeah, absolutely. A couple thoughts on that side. I think that the two words that come to mind for me here are academic innovation. It's true. At an R1 institution, we need to keep our core master's programs. They're a huge part of the portfolio. They're an important part of the portfolio. We also know in a competitive market that's getting more saturated and in some cases more concentrated, far too often programs don't adapt and meet the needs of both the students they purportedly serve and the outcomes that they expect. So one of the ways I think about this is first doing an assessment for every program. And this is something I was on site with a public institution in California a couple months ago, and we did a half-day workshop around this. Was starting by asking, let's do a steady state assessment of what are the student inputs? So sort of hearkening back to that persona slide that I shared a little earlier, who are the students that that program is actually serving? Starting by looking inward, think not just who do we want to serve, not who we market to, who's actually in the program. And then asking ourselves, are there aspects of this program that are keeping other students from participating? And are there aspects of the program we can change or modify or update to open it to more students that we want to address in the market of the student preferences? So that's the input side. On the other side is this question of outcome, and that is, are the program outcomes, the student learning outcomes, actually aligned with student expectations and market expectations? And I'll give an example. I see this a lot right now. It's computer science. I think every computer science program in the country is about to have to go through a realignment based on the rise of AI. Partly because, at least again, I'm here in San Francisco. AI is really good at writing code. That is something it's pretty decent at. As we think about generative AI in that space, there's probably going to be an alignment to say, what do these technology companies actually need from their graduates? Is our program actually meeting it? So that's one example. So how are we doing some assessment of our outcomes to say, what are the employer skills that are being asked for? Where are our graduates actually working? And this is a critical one. Not where do we market that we'd like them to go? What does our data show of where they're actually headed? And then using that to inform the core parts of the program. The last thing I'll add here is thinking about the recombinant DNA of the institution. Often we get so overwhelmed in a resource constrained environment of trying to make these changes that we don't end up doing anything. And what I often remind partners is that, especially at a place like Rutgers, you already have so many things that you do well. How can we build upon our own strengths as an institution to update and modify programs? And again, this is work that I do almost every single day with institutions, guide them through this conversation. That's something that we at EAB really get a kick out of and enjoy supporting.
No, I certainly appreciate that. And the two things that really stood out to me there were, just making sure that program outcomes are at the forefront, and reviewing them, and periodically making a reassessment of where you're at there. Um, Also, in your slides we were talking about, and it came up multiple times, about the ongoing discussion about stackability, micro-credentialing, expanded, non-credit to credit pathways as a way to grow access to education enrollment. How might we think about this given the data that's indicating that there's a limited appeal for certificate programs, or at least that those that are being conferred are not, the data isn't showing an appetite given how many programs are being launched?
So I think I referenced it, but I want to say it acutely for all of you. This is a buzzy moment. I mean, it feels like everyone's talking about micro-credentials and certificates, whether you are reading Inside Higher Ed or the Chronicle, or frankly, I mean, the World Economic Forum was talking about it in Davos. Like, this is a national, international conversation. And there's money behind that. I mean, in Australia, the government gave a $400,000 grant to create these things. And we hear from employers this excitement as well. When I talk internally in higher education, I often get sort of three mindsets that come up around micro-credentials. One is this agreement that this is the future of higher education. These smaller, more digestible programs are the way we're all going to head. Then there's the middle ground that says, I don't know. Some days I like it, some days I don't, but I'm feeling a lot of pressure from my leadership team to build these things. And so we're going to. And then the third take I get is, I don't believe in these things at all, but also if this really is the future, I don't want to get left behind. And so our view as a firm and the way we think institutions should approach it is, yes, it is worth dangling your feet in the water and doing some small scale experimentation with the micro-credential space, because it is so nascent, because there is opportunity. But we don't want to take that future of higher education viewpoint where that's where we go all in, because it's inherently riskier. As some of the data shows, the world is not necessarily keeping up with higher education and even government actors' excitement. So our view and how we think you would approach it is actually, and this is counterintuitive, even though they're shorter and smaller programs, doing more financial analysis, more planning, all of those foundational practices we would typically do launching a master's program, doubling down on all of those for a micro-credential, because while there is opportunity for growth and you could strike big, it's also really easy to lose money on them and lose revenue and actually hurt people's time and energy that they've spent. So our view is doubling down on what's our review process look like. This is an opportunity. How do we think about reviewing our programs? Back to that innovation piece I just shared with the masters. How do we think about the finances behind this program and the content availability? How do we think about how it's aligned with employer expectations? And the good news here is, even if they end up being a flash in the pan, we've improved all these foundational practices that help our adult education online programs, no matter what, in the course of things. So the last thing I'll say here is there's two ways you can think about it. One is the room for standalone credentials, and there is great opportunity in that space, especially if they're market aligned. I want to say it's the University of Maine developed one around Indigenous policing. So they had a very specific need and niche, and they were able to enroll students. And so that's one approach. The other way is using it to innovate the degree. And this is my favorite. Arcadia University, you all can look at this example, has a master's of education now that's entirely made up of certificates. So I believe they offer, I want to say it's 7 or 9 different certificates. The student has to pick 3 to complete the master's degree. And so that's been actually a way to support a foundational program and allow them to innovate and also meet that flexibility of adult learners. So we have a whole workshop, and we have a lot more research we can share on this topic. But that's some of the top line thinking and our point of view on that area.
That last point was important because I was already going to tee up another question about the slides where we're talking about the adult learner looking for flexibility. And you hit with that last point there about the ability to then use the certificates to then build and stack and get that degree in the end. So it's trying to find ways to not just launch a certificate program on its own, but to find ways that you can meet the needs of your adult learner and meet that flexibility.
I think it all goes back to that foundational practice. Who is the learner we're trying to serve? And often, let's just call it out, and this is true of not just micro-credentials and certificates, a lot of programs, it's driven by 1 or 2 really excited, passionate faculty member stakeholders who want to launch the thing. And that's great. We need those champions. But if it's not based in, is there a market for this program? Even if we want to launch something for mission, we shouldn't be losing money on mission, even if we're breaking even. We at least want to be there.
So we have some questions in the chat, so I'll translate them. And so one is you talked to us about what information stealth shoppers are looking for and the importance of the website and access to information in that way. And the question is, what are the best mechanisms to recruit or attract master's level students in today's age? So I think this really goes to the sort of direct advertising, marketing, you know, where should we be active so that our programs are visible?
So a couple thoughts there. I think first, we have some wonderful colleagues in our adult learner recruitment division that do this endlessly, and they've got quite a bit of work around targeting and thinking about psychometrics and some of these other ways to go through it. So I think that's worth a conversation. But from our perspective, just in the macro, on the research side, one area we're seeing is these informal channels, particularly tied, and I think Stuart put this in the conversation a little bit too in the chat, but around the rise of who is looking at the programs. One of the shifts we're seeing is a lot of those Gen Z preferences that I mentioned earlier, the algorithm-driven social, a lot of those views are actually translating to the rest of the market, even the students who aren't Gen Z. And I'll give one example of this. We used to love the God voice in advertising. I think we can all remember this days of institutions that would have very top-down, look at how incredible we are. You have the deep booming voiceover on television or online, and that doesn't translate to this market. And so when we think about how we're going to capture those students, the first answer is we sort of need to be everywhere. And that means not over investing in any single platform. So that's the first mistake, is folks say, oh, we just need to look at Google search. Well, 40% of Gen Z is using TikTok as a search engine. So there goes your entire Gen Z cohort almost, if you're just using search. We just need the website. No, we need the website, but that can't be the only thing. It really has to be across the board now, which is, I know it's an annoying answer, but that's the reality. And that's why that's something our adult learner recruitment team does a lot of time on, is trying to think about all the different channels that one can be in. I think foundationally, my answer is you just need to make yourself as easy as possible to find. And part of that is really surfacing the information that matters the most to these students, surfacing out that time to completion, surfacing out the cost, and not making students bury it. The other one I'll say, last thing, is employers. There is a huge opportunity for employer partnerships and thinking about your local region. We're in a world right now where, especially in online education, we are competing with McDonald's. And when I say McDonald's, I'm referring to online giants like Western Governors in Southern New Hampshire that have money to advertise everywhere. You don't want to be McDonald's. You want to be that regional specialty burger. You want to be, if I'm in California, I have to give this example. You want to be the In-N-Out. You want to be the one that's got something special. And connecting back to your employer partnerships, connecting to your region, some of those connections can be a huge way to grow the funnel for students. Anthony, other thoughts you have on this topic? I think that just want to see.
No, I think that's right on point. And what I've been talking about a lot with partners that I work with, like you said, what is that brand? What is that thing that differentiates us, that makes somebody want to, I don't want to say overlook all of the other things, but it becomes a factor as well, right? So knowing who you are, what you want, who you want to target, and why should they choose you out of anybody else that they could be considering. Being clear on those things will be super helpful.
Yeah, so another question is going back to that insight that you shared, that those that have stopped out of Rutgers are our best audience to recruit. And so sort of talk through how to approach that. What are they looking for? What should our outreach look like? What should our resources look like, kind of as we think about that? And this was specifically graduate students. So I think that's another piece of it. There is some credit, no degree. And then also if you could sort of weave in how that might apply to graduate students as well, that would be great.
Absolutely. So given the audience I have here and the question, I'll start actually with a foundational practice that it may not help you get more students right now, but it's one that I recommend, and we recommend to partners all the time, that you should start doing right now to prepare for the future. And that is, when a student is going to stop out from the program, how are you normalizing and offering the on-ramp opportunity to that student when they are headed out? So one of the practices, and I think this is typically, we see this more on the undergraduate side in practice, although I think it would work well for a graduate space as well, is when a student comes to you, if they do come to you and says, I'm dropping, how are we creating a level of, or I say diminishing the level of shame that students feel in that process? Because it is a shameful moment. I have had friends who stopped out of graduate programs. I have friends who stopped out of undergraduate. And sometimes that is one of the hardest moments for them to get to. And sometimes it has nothing to do with the institution. It's that something horrible has happened in their life. So they're feeling terrible moment about a life event, and they have to pull out in this level of disappointment. And so one shift institutions can make is, in that initial conversation or even the outboarding form process, first saying, yeah, we understand life happens, especially for adult learners, it gets in the way. And then in that question, asking out front, when do you think you want to come back? And we've seen a couple partners do this. When do you want to come back? Do you want us to reach out in 1 month? Do you want us to reach out in 6 months? And that creates a touch point where you are going back in and actively reaching out. And again, it's normalizing, not that we want students to stop out, but we know life happens. We're normalizing that reality and offering students a way to return that way. And again, getting ahead of that disappointment and shame that they might feel. So that's one practice I think we could all literally work on right now or implement in the next week, and that would be helpful for supporting stop-outs. There's a couple different approaches we've seen, from low lift to very heavy lift approaches in re-recruiting stop-outs. One institution we work with in the South has stop-out counselors. So they will go through and literally reach out to every single student and offer basically completion advisors. This is at a smaller institution, so it may not be as scalable. Depends on the size of the program. However, at the graduate level, this might be possible. is literally actively reaching out to everyone who stopped out, but first looking at their student record and figuring out what would they need to do and messaging to them as part of that conversation. We've done an analysis and here's everything that you need to do. The other opportunity we saw that's a little more broadly scaled was looking at offering multiple options for completion. This worked more for undergraduate, some college students, but saying, you know, we mapped your credits and this is the fastest path to a degree and we know you want a degree. So for most of these programs, it's some level of personal advising and support. But I think it goes back again and again to the tone we use with these students and the messaging that it's okay and we want you here and we get that life happens. And unfortunately, as Anthony put in the chat, that level of disappointment just comes across again and again. The one X factor here, of course, is students who academically were not eligible for the program moving forward. And in that case, it's giving them a path. If they are a student we think can successfully complete, giving them a clear path of here's what you need to do and here's how we'll support you on the way.
Yeah.
And Anthony, go ahead.
And John, I'll just add, you know, and acknowledging that the tone of that message is different for each audience.
Yes.
All right. I know sometimes we work with our marketing colleagues and it feels like a one size fits all in terms of the messaging, but acknowledging, yeah, different demographics, different groups need to hear different things.
So following the thread of not every adult learner is the same, and you know, showed us this high level overview of how we might start to think about that. And the question in the chat is about age differences. And so just, is there more data that you have on those variations and how you might approach a student in one area as compared to another, or at one age as compared to another? And you know, I know we don't have time to run through that in detail now. So, you know, how would we go about accessing that kind of information?
So, you know, maybe I shot myself in the foot here. As much as I focused on age, as much as I said Gen Z matters, I mentioned that because the youngest generation is driving the preferences for marketing as a whole. However, I would go back again, more than age. I think it's all about the persona and reason that they're in education. And I find that you could have a 19-year-old and a 60-year-old that both have the same reason to be in school, right? They're both there because they want to upskill or they're wearing replacement. You could also have obviously students at different ages that have very different viewpoints. So I wouldn't get caught up. I do agree with Stuart with the point in the chat about, you know, we see them being very different in their life cycle. But I think that goes back to more than their age, of understanding here's why they're doing this. Here's why they're in school. And do we have a good understanding of why the students in our specific program are driven to be in this program? Even by, and we can't assume by title. I mean, this is a key example. I see students in Masters of Education programs. And we can make an assumption of why a student's in that program. It's a popular program across the country. I guarantee if you interview all of those students, they will have very different answers for what drove them to that program at that certain point in their life, what's keeping them doing it day to day. So again, I think age matters for marketing and being mindful of the overall audiences that we're looking at, and again, the way that they're stealth shopping and the way that they are diversifying the sources of information, that's flowing across. But more important than age is understanding the persona of the student in each individual program. And I can't highlight enough. Not across Rutgers, not across online, across the individual program experience.
All right, so that brings us to 5 o'clock, which we promised would be a less formal. And I'm going to take off the spotlight and let people raise hands and stay if they're available. But before we do that, I just want to say a formal thank you to both of you for being here. It's been terrific. We have recorded this formal part of the presentation, and we will be sharing that out, as well as other materials with you. And so, and also asking for the audience feedback on what we should feature next, how we should format the presentation, and really looking to you for guidance so that we can create the most value for you as we try to bring this expertise to Rutgers. So I'm going to stop there, turn on